My name is Diana Lopez, and this is Medusa's Awakening Podcast. Trigger warning. This episode might address sensitive subjects that may be distressing for some listeners. Topics discussed include violence, sexual violence, childhood abuse, mental health issues, and substance abuse. Please be mindful of your own well-being while listening. If you find these topics triggering or difficult, seek support from a mental health professional or a trusted individual. We thank you for listening. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Medusa's Awakening Podcast. Today, I have here a very special guest who has chosen to remain anonymous, but what I can tell you is that she was in law enforcement for 38 years, with the first 8 years as a San Francisco police dispatcher, and the following 30 years as a police officer who worked many specialties, one of them being the first female sergeant in her department. Her background emphasis is in child abuse investigations, among other specialties in the department. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So in today's episode, we are going to be talking about a couple of different cases and scenarios where kids and adults have asked law enforcement for help and how it went wrong or how we could be corresponding or communicating with them better. And what we can do as civilians to get what we need out of law enforcement. And so I just want to take this time to remind everybody this episode does have a trigger warning. We will be talking about sex abuse, grooming, stalking, and human trafficking. So make sure you are mindful of any triggers that might show up. So let's get into this. This first situation I want to talk about took place in the summer of this year. How I heard about this was there was a video that had circulated of a missing 15-year-old named Alison Chao out of Monterey Park, California. So she had been missing for about a week. And as you can imagine, we were all thinking the worst, right? There are so many factors as to why a teen would go missing. And of course, we are seeing the mom bawling her eyes out on TV. She's desperately looking for her daughter. Then one day, there she is walking up to the news station after being missing for about a week. And the first thing she says is, "I just want to be heard." Saying that now just gives me the chills because not many teens have that. So
Right.
Very happy for her. I'm very happy that she was able to express that. Now, what I want to kind of do is describe a little bit about this scenario. So like I said, like I just described that is where we caught up with Alison Chao was she had been missing. There was an active videos of circulating online, like, please help us find her, please help us find her. But what unfolded after she came back from being missing, so to speak, is what had unfolded after that was just mind-blowing to me. And this is why I feel like there's so many issues when it comes to custody, when it comes to kids having to deal one-on-one with law enforcement, and how a lot of parents are also, safe parents are also possibly not being heard because this is one of many, right? Kind of scenarios that unfold this way. Now, what I want to tell the listeners is, those of you that don't know about this, I believe it was the day or the day before she had went missing. She was at her father's house. Her parents are divorced. And her mom had a court order to force Alison from her father's house where she felt safe. It came to light later that her mother and grandfather had been physically and sexually abusing her, and there are police reports of those incidents. So not too sure if the courts just shrugged it off or what, because the mother had her court order to take Alison. And I believe the mother was trying to have her committed or just removed from the house. That part I'm really not sure of because there was all these things later that had came up about the mom trying to commit her. And so the reports, like I said, abuse that were on file. And around the time Alison disappeared, the police had gone to her dad's house in order to remove her. So before we start this discussion, I'm going to play this clip of the interaction between Alison and her father with the police the day before she winds up going missing.
Do you mind opening the door for me, Allison, please?
No, sorry. Why do I need to open the door?
Because I do need to speak with you.
But I'm speaking with you. I feel safer on this side. I'm not going.
You open the door and you go with mom, and it's a done deal.
I'm not going.
Okay.
I'm not
Okay.
going anywhere with her.
Okay.
You guys told me that when she's 14, she can make a decision last time. That's what you guys told me last time.
So are you gonna open the door so daughter could come out? No. Just answer my question.
I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm
not going.
You need to go.
How many times do I have to tell you I'm not going? She abused me. She hurt me.
Can you open the door?
No, I don't feel safe around.
I was advised.
Mom has agreed that maybe if you could drive her out there, she needs to be there by 11 today.
I said I'm not going.
Mom doesn't have to.
I'm not going.
Okay, then understand what happens next. If the judge takes you away from both parents, that's the decision that you made. Okay, not us, not dad, not mom. Okay.
I'm not going.
Okay, you're not willing to go with dad.
No.
Okay.
Okay. So that's a lot, right? Like just the pain in her voice is so much to bear. Like just listening to her makes me want to immediately jump in front of her to defend her.
This gives me the chills.
Right? And it's just so mind-boggling that somebody can stand opposite of a kid that is clearly in distress and clearly stating she feels safe here. So then why are you forcing her from this situation? And it's not, like I said, it's not just her. There's plenty of other times where you have seen videos of a custody case where the abusive parent is saying, I have visitation right at this moment. And there are police that are literally picking kids up and shoving them in the car to take them. And they're just like, that parent abuses them. Like, why are you forcing them to go? You should be protecting them. So with everything that we know from the situation, right? The cops were just there to get her to leave. That was their job. Their job was to go and make her and enforce this situation. They were there they weren't trying to listen to her. They weren't trying to listen to the dad. And then towards the end, how he tries to guilt her to leaving too. Like that to me, like I picked up on that and I was just like, how do you guilt a child? Like, oh, you don't want to leave. So then now everybody else is going to jail but you, or something like that.
Is that the wording he used?
I think
jail?
I think he said, it came later. They wound up arresting the father because he didn't he wouldn't force her to leave. So they wound up arresting the father later on. But let's go back.
So
if you hear her clearly in distress and not being heard, so what is the first thing that you saw that needed to happen next in this type of case?
So I have a couple of questions because it is difficult for any police officer, whether they're retired or even active, to answer the question without the full set of circumstances, because there are always components that are missing. So part of this I see can be a training issue, but it also can be that there are other pieces of it that the general public does not know. For instance, was there a court order, a piece of paper where a judge issued stating that she needed to be taken into custody? And that is one of the questions that I have. Was that presented? Because unfortunately, the other parent is in violation if they fail to follow that court order. Now, there's a law that is an order to show cause, which states that even if there is a court order, if the other parent files that order to show cause, that will supersede that current order. What you have there is an officer who is following this court order without having, sounds like, and I'm guessing at this, that did not have the full picture, because they're coming to enforce an order and they're going back out. Remember, these are general practitioners, like to give the analogy of a doctor, when most, not all, officers are coming out and they're there as an emergency situation, like you go into the ER room, they are not your follow-up. We have to remember that when you're dealing with that, there is a limited response on what they're going to do, and even sometimes what the knowledge base is. That has to go, that's why we have a detective department that will actually take a look at this.
Mhm.
Now, in this case, excuse me, I would have been having a sergeant, a supervisor does have to come out on scene.
In all cases like this, or is it something that you're saying that maybe the father should have asked for a supervisor or for a sergeant to come on scene?
Yes, absolutely. Because if he had some concerns about releasing the child and the amount of distress that the child is under is going to automatically, I would be contacting a sergeant. And most of them actually, got to tell you, the good news is most of them will call. Your line level officer is going to call for a supervisor.
Because they just don't want to deal with
It
it.
sounds
They're just
like-
kind of like, this is above my pay grade. Let me
Right.
just call somebody else.
So the parent doesn't realize what options he may or may not have, but a court order is legally having to be followed unless you can show just cause as to why that should not be adhered to. And that is when he would file, there's a penal code section for that in the state of California for an order to show cause. And then what happens is a judge reviews that and says, okay, we need further investigation before this child is placed in the custody. Now, what is not new in law enforcement, this is not new law, is that if an officer, and a lot of officers don't know this, that if there's a question, and I'll give you in a scenario where if you come out of state and you have a court order that says I have full custody of this child because there's some kind of abuse or whatever, even if you have, it's your time to have that person in a custody order. And you come to California and you get one over here, but you already had a parent that had one in another state. So then the police come out and there's a court order. Maybe one parent has the court order and the other one doesn't. Let's say they both have them and they're very prepared. What do the police do then?
Right.
Besides call their supervisor.
Yeah.
Because I think even a supervisor would be a little challenged on this if they're not emphasizing some special training in this area. And what people, at least, and I'm speaking only for the state of California, I'm sure they probably have something similar in other states, but that is, the police have the full authority to then take that child into protective custody, meaning that you're not going to be in violation of either order. Neither parent is subject to arrest based on what the new information is being told at the time to the police department. So the police then would so the police have the authority to remove the child. And in this county, in this area, it is Child Protective Service that would be notified. They would come on scene and they take the child to do placement until a judge can hear why this should not occur or they should not go to another person. And there needs to be a full investigation done by both the Child Protective Services and the police department. Now, remember, I want to add here that the police department is the one that does the investigation for the criminal complaints. So in this case, there are criminal allegations.
Right.
The role of a Child Protective Service agency is to do that, protect them and keep them in protective custody. They do placement. They have the right to get the criminal backgrounds from the people that they are placing them in. So sometimes it's not always a good thing to give them to a family member because there's other helping or contributing factors to why these crimes are occurring. So Child Protective Services is tasked to check that to make, the best to the best of their ability to place that child. But what we need to do in this scenario is then ask the parent why, and the child needs to be interviewed as to what is going on. Now, we have heard many times where one parent pits the child against the other, and so that is why you're hearing the police officer say, no, you need to come into custody, because we've heard that before, albeit she's very distressed.
Right.
But kids will cry because they want to stay with that parent, and sometimes that's not always in their best interest. So we have to keep that in mind and not come to conclusions based on a news broadcast or one side of the statement.
Right.
Even from the victim, in that there's a bigger picture depending upon especially the age.
Yeah.
Because when police officers are interviewing a victim that is under 18, you have to be trained and certified as a forensic interviewer.
And how often do you think that training happens in most police departments?
Well, that has changed
Mm.
in our police departments now. It is protocol in most agencies, and I can't speak out of state, but it probably is something similar, where that is done by a team, and it is now a civilian
Mhm.
interviewer who has
Oh.
to certify once a year minimally on the recertification of the interview of a juvenile. And the reason that exists is because there is case law in the McMartin versus the state of California, in that there was a case of, false allegations,
Right.
and that set precedence to what we have today with the forensic interviewer. Police officers were trained for this forensic interviewer. I was one of them.
Mhm.
However, going forward, that is now done by a civilian. It is not done by the police.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so that's why we would take the juvenile into protective custody
Mhm.
until that can be done in a safe, calm environment. Obviously, she can't be interviewed at that moment,
No, right?
but we would take custody of her, and we would need to do that so she could be safe
And so she could be heard.
and be heard.
Because
without-
she was clearly in distress. You could hear it in her voice. You can hear it in her
Right.
tone. She did not feel safe with her mother.
Right.
You have, her best friend coming on, as well, and indicating that, right, most girls that age would say the same thing about their mom. Their mom is the devil.
Mhm.
But the fact that she had already had police reports filed on both her mother and the grandfather, her mother's father, about, sexual abuse and physical abuse. And like you said, when these police officers, what we're dealing with is, you're not going to get the police officer that took the report that totally understands where this is coming from, and, oh, I've been there since day one, so let me just jump on scene and make this all
Right. We lose some continuity.
right. And so what this podcast episode, what I want it to be, is like exactly what you're doing, is telling us, like, how do we communicate that to law enforcement, to this officer who is coming off the street, not knowing you, the family, not knowing any of the situation. So how do we talk to them? How do we communicate with them and ultimately get what we need, which was, I think what she needed was definitely what you just described, a place where she was removed from both parents,
Right.
and a situation where she can, like, sit down, be heard in a safe space.
And the police have the authority to do that, and that is not new.
And clearly this is not happening.
Because they don't know. I
Right.
think that there's a lack of training within the police department, because there
Absolutely.
is so much specialty. And let me give you, for the general public to understand, an analogy as to what they're dealing with.
Mhm.
When you have knee surgery and you see your primary doctor, is your primary doctor doing the knee surgery? No.
No.
The primary doctor is making a referral to that specialty,
Right.
because that's who's going to actually perform the surgery after evaluation. And in this case, and I am speaking in general, because you do have people out there that are specialized that rotate back out on the street.
Oh, okay.
So that does exist as well. I'm speaking in general.
Sure.
However, this is a general intake. They're going to have a general knowledge. They are required to know this and are certified and completely updated in training ongoing throughout your entire career. However, it is not a specialty that is going to be able to have the time and the schooling that it would take to have this. So what we can do in those cases is call in your detective, because every single department has a detective who have at least some training that is specializing in child abuse investigations,
Mhm.
as well as a supervisor who hopefully has some kind of knowledge, and they don't always have that, because our supervisors are not all specialized.
Right. Right.
And they may not be aware that we have the authority in the state of California to take full custody
Mhm.
and override the court orders. Now, one of the things that you can do, like what I was saying, is fill out a report for an order to show cause.
Mhm.
If you know that this court order exists and that the child is supposed to be in the custody of the mother in this case,
Mhm.
what the father needed to do, and he just doesn't know
Right.
that he should have gone to his local police department where in his jurisdiction where he's at and fill out an order to show cause. That would force that to go into court so it can be evaluated. And that way the police aren't coming knocking on your door talking about dragging the child out.
Right.
And that's inappropriate. They should have had a supervisor coming out and then evaluating what they could do and get CPS involved. Although at that point, it is the police department that is enforcing the court order, not Child Protective Services. We would only
Right.
consult with them because they would have to be the agency that would take custody. Because it is fully on Child Protective Services to do placement. It is
Right.
not the authority of the police department. And in the past, I can't speak for now, sometimes they would, if there was incidents, not in this particular case, where they
Sure.
would say, oh, they can stay with Aunt Jane until, we straighten this out. And that's actually illegal and they can't do that. And it doesn't mean, hey, come get somebody was in an accident, come get your child. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking
Right.
about a court order where there's questions involved about the child's safety. That is where Child Protective Services' role is to make sure that that child is safe.
Yeah.
And they do placement. It is not the authority of the police department to decide where that's going to be.
Right.
But some things went wrong here, and I don't think anyone, if you look at it from both sides, is wrong. What they don't have enough knowledge on
Right.
what to do.
Right. And that's the big problem here.
Including the police department. So, because they have
Yeah.
a court order and they are an officer of the court.
Yeah.
And they are in violation if they fail to carry out that court order, including if we have to physically remove somebody. And that does involve, part of what a police officer does. So I understand the officer's role and what he was doing, but there was not enough information and training to understand that we have a third thing that we can do. And most people don't know about the order to show cause. A lot of them do because they come in and they're getting information, hopefully through podcasts like this and other advocates where they contact, Child Protective Service that says,
Right.
okay, you need to do an order to show cause. And next time we talk, I can actually tell you what the actual penal code is because I don't have it off the top of my head.
No worries.
But doesn't matter if you say an order to show cause and you came into the police department, you do not need to be a walking penal code book.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, right? Like we don't know what we don't know either.
Right.
But we need to understand in kind of an easier manner of when you have these types of scenarios and you
Right.
feel like law enforcement is just not hearing you,
Or
you're not
stonewalling.
or stonewalling you, or not allowing for certain things to take place where you would feel safe or you would feel heard. And so,
Right.
so this is the important topic.
Always call a supervisor.
There you go.
Let's start with that.
Let's start with that. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to jump to this next example. I'm not going to play a video this time, but this is a video that is so, and the reason why I picked this specific scenario is because these types of videos have been circulated around for a while now, and a lot of them is, it is young women who I don't know what it is about Target, but they always seem to happen at Target. So this particular video is of a young woman who's shopping at a Target, and she, like so many other women like her, created a video to kind of raise awareness and ultimately wanting to make sure that other women don't become victims. In this video, she describes of how she goes to this Target and starts noticing while she's shopping that this man is following her. In other videos, I see that these men are probably in teams of like 2 or 3. What they do is they find the girl that they want, right? This has the elements of stalking. This has elements of human trafficking. And so they locate a girl in the store that they notice that they want. They stalk them throughout the store. And basically when they leave the store, they either follow them home, they put a tracker on their car, they lure them from the parking lot. It's given human trafficking, right? So in the video, this woman is describing how she was afraid to go out to the parking lot because she had noticed that this man was following her around the store. So she winds up asking security to walk her to her car. And when she gets to her car, she notices that that man who had been following her in the store has met up with another man that is now parked right next to her, it's very creepy. So of course I go running to the comments like everybody else, and then these are the comments that, why didn't you call the police? And as you can imagine, the comments after those of why didn't you call the police are very unfavorable about law enforcement, right? Comments mostly like, why? They don't show up and do anything anyways. Why? So they can show up 5 hours later. And this last comment was from a mother who had said, this happened to my daughter at a different Target, and she did call the police. And the police told her he isn't doing anything illegal. He probably just thinks you're really pretty. Like, I can't with this last one, but
Okay.
you tell me, what do you recommend here that kids, adults do when they're being followed like that? When there's this element of, human trafficking is number one in California. So we are the first in the United States for this. So you would think that in California, maybe more police officers would take this a little bit more seriously when it comes to stalking, gang stalking, things like that. But what do you recommend after hearing something like this?
So again, with some of these scenarios and some of these videos, I do have questions because when you said the mother came on and made a comment and said, I called the police and they didn't do anything. They said, oh, she probably thought he was pretty. Okay, somebody's going to probably get some time off for that. They're going to get a written reprimand at minimally being, it's a training issue. But here's my question.
But then the mother would have to go and do what?
No,
in order for
she doesn't need to go anywhere.
Oh, okay.
So let's back this up.
Okay.
First of all, who was she talking to? I know you only have a comment on there, but when she's, quote, calling the police, who is she talking to?
Was it a dispatcher? Was it somebody in the police department?
So this matters. So this matters.
It does.
So let's remember that when people make comments on these types of videos, there is a lack of understanding that your first point of contact with the police department is not a police officer.
It is a dispatcher.
It is a civilian dispatcher who is an emergency intake call taker.
There you go.
They are not going to be the one that is trained on human trafficking or even the sound of it. I'm sure they have some, exposure. There is training that is required by the state of California. We are way more advanced than when I first came in. And this is now, they are being trained to recognize certain things in calls. However, it is a limited training because these aren't the people in the field that are going to be dealing with this. So what we have to do in that case is, if they're refusing to send an officer, that's not really up to the dispatcher. And I have to tell you, that's where you're going to have to really be advocating for yourself and contacting a supervisor. Now, one of the things that has changed in our society is that most dispatch are contracted by the police department to a civilian agency that are not police officers. They're contracted. They used to be one. So we didn't have as many of these problems.
Right.
Now you have civilians that are making decisions they shouldn't be making. So I would be asking to speak to the street sergeant supervisor and ask them to contact you and to come to your house, and that you are insisting on speaking to an officer. Please send me an officer. What is your name?
Right.
What is your dispatch number? Oh, number blah, blah. Okay, I will need to speak to an officer. Please send them to my house. I am insisting on having an officer coming out. Tell them to come to my house now.
Yeah.
It is not their right to refuse that service.
Okay.
Now, one of the things that a dispatcher does, let you know that in their policy, and they have policies that are not law. Let's all remember that policy is not law.
Okay.
They, for instance, to give you an example, if you get into a car crash and there is no injury and they go, I want a police report because I already know that's going to affect my insurance, and it would behoove all of us if we could all get police reports, everyone.
Right.
However, that's not realistic today. So you're going to ask this dispatcher to have an officer come out. However, they're going to tell you, we don't respond on those types of calls. You need to explain, you need to exchange information. She's not wrong. That is the policy because it's not possible. But in this scenario, this isn't a car accident. So it's just a very different thing. And you're going to have to be a little more assertive in insisting on having an officer or a supervisor sent to your location. And I don't mean on the phone. Some of them will try to say that they'll call you. I would be asking them to come. If you needed to have them on the phone, I mean, I suppose you could. I could talk to them on the phone, but I would much rather have them come to my house and tell them that you want to report. The police department does not have a right to refuse reports. They may try to talk you out of it, or if you have something that actually they cannot report. I can't think of an example, but that there is no merit to a report or something that maybe somebody has, they're on medication. And so they're just saying, I'm on a report. And so I want you to do this. And but that they already historically have some medications that they take in a diagnosis. I'm not going to make a report.
Yeah.
So, and that's because I know the history. And remember, the police department, if you work and live in that same area, they do have history. They have the ability to see the previous calls and the previous contacts with the individual. And in this case, they would have seen that the mother had never called.
Right.
She's not a repeat caller.
Right.
They are going to send the police officer out and say, oh, we already tried to advise her and she's refusing. It's very different from what you are talking to with the police dispatcher versus a police officer. I'm here to tell you, even before I retired, that the emphasis is on human trafficking. There is a specific trainings mandatory now. People in the police academies right now are mandatorily coming out with that training.
Oh, wow.
It is required by the state.
Yeah.
And they are well aware of this being a real forefront problem, even over narcotic sales.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they're aware of that.
Yeah.
And so let's remember that when we're talking to the police department, you're going to have to be assertive and ask to have an officer come out, because you are not speaking to the police. You are speaking to a civilian dispatcher 99.9% of the time. And there's a limited knowledge on these types of calls. And do not take no for an answer in any case. Yeah. You have that officer come out and document that.
And that's the key, right? Because, okay, they come out and take the report, and there might not be anything that they could do in that moment. That person is not physically brandishing a weapon. They're not, holding them hostage. But the key is that we're finding, especially because of stalking, and especially because if it's always, sorry, I got to front off this county, Riverside County. I don't know what is happening, but you guys need to get your shit together, because it is always, it's been these targets that are kind of like in this county or in the surrounding.
That's one of the biggest counties in our state.
Yeah. And it's not just that, like, I have to admit this too. There have been allegations about Riverside County CPS as well being involved in trafficking children. And which is really hard to, grasp and understand, but it's not, it is something that keeps coming to light over and over by these child survivors. And the idea, though, going back to the stalking thing, is the idea is, yes, there probably isn't anything that officer can do in that moment besides take a police report. But let's talk about the importance of the reason why we need to have police reports on file is because they need a paper trail of, wow, what is going on here? We're seeing all these police reports for this particular target. We're seeing all these police reports for this particular spot. Why do we keep having calls of women being stalked at this store or in this location? And they won't know that. They won't put those pieces together until there's a paper trail.
Right. And here is something that, yes, they can do, and it is protocol for them to be doing. Is that they take the report and let's say that, they know that they've been made. So these suspects, of course, take off even before the police would ever even come out there to even speak to the victim at the store. Let's say that.
Yeah.
The girl did the right thing by contacting security. And then I would have, in addition, stood by with security while waiting for the police department to come out. Now, these people are going to figure it out when she's with the security guard, because now there's witnesses. But here is what does matter and why they still need to take an incident report.
Mhm.
And that is the paper trail you spoke of. But the targets all have videos.
Yeah.
So they want that because we put out what's called track flyers.
Oh,
And so we would capture a photo if we get a clear photo, but
Mhm.
even a clothing description, if I can't even see their face, is still put out. That can go throughout the state of California. It can go to the entire United States if we want to. It depends on, there is a criteria for what they're putting out, as to how far it goes out, whether it's local or Bay Area
right,
or versus the state.
right.
Those are put out for all law enforcement. So if we have somebody that matches the description, because there's a description that matches something similar in Riverside County,
Mhm.
they are communicating. We have way more sophisticated ways, and we're much better at connecting with other agencies than we were yesteryear. And this is where that information, while the initial officer comes out and takes a report, that actually goes into the detective division of all
Okay.
departments, and they will go, wait, what? And then go back and get that video, look in the cameras for what car they got into. And this is how things get solved. And it is from people that are calling us
Mhm.
that these cases get solved.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sound cliche, but if you see something, you do need to say something, because even if you think you're getting dismissed, it is that one time that we
Right.
solve a case, and I can't tell you how many times that has actually happened. So there are more of that than this is the one person's experience, and it may be the first time they're dealing with law enforcement and they throw their hands up. And I understand that. However, that is not how it is in all departments and in all times. But remember, just bypass the civilian dispatcher, because that is not a police officer you are talking to. People need to realize that, at least in this area, that is not who you're talking to. There could be people retired and gone into that. I would emphasize that. I am a police officer, so here, tell me, and then I would,
Sure.
but we wouldn't be having this conversation, because if I'm acting in the role of a dispatcher, I'm
Right.
sending someone out.
Right.
I'm a
right.
better screener at this point.
Right.
That's what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that makes total sense. And it's almost like we, the public, have to be educated
Yes.
on the best ways to deal with law enforcement,
Right.
because you are going to get the person that goes, I just need this. I'm coming out to resolve this issue, and I need to resolve this, and I want to resolve this issue quickly. And so I'm going to do everything I can to resolve, but then they don't have the trauma competency training. They don't
Right.
have other trainings when it comes to dealing with stalking. And
Right.
so, speaking of stalking, to me, stalking is one of the hardest things to really prove or to get kind of action on. And I think goes back again to where, if you are being stalked, even if it's by somebody that you know, that the idea of making those police reports, because again, you need that paper trail. You're not going to get somebody's outside my house stalking me right now. They've been, they keep coming down my street. They keep following me. There's going to be that, but then there's also going to be elements of, I think somebody tapped my phone, or I think somebody's
Right.
taking my message, because there's so much of this. It's so easy to access
Right.
now, that the importance of filing those reports, even though that cop is saying, I'm filing this report, but there's nothing I can pick him up for something right now because I don't have proof, or I can't make that connection right now.
Right.
But the importance of filing those reports is to create, it's just like if you are in a domestic violence situation. I know that there's the issue with, the partner not feeling safe enough to oftentimes file a police report because of the backlash that will happen after.
Mhm.
But the sense of having that paper trail, having that evidence aligned, whether you're taking the photos yourself, whether you're creating the stream of paper trail yourself, but it's the importance of having that to show.
Yes.
This person's been stalking me for 2 years. Okay, how? Will he,
Yeah, there's no documentation. And I'm here to tell you that it's almost as though it didn't occur.
Right.
Because if you do not document that in a police report, you are starting from ground one. And the example is when somebody gets to the point where, oh, I want a restraining order in the stalking by a known suspect, as an example, you're going to show up in court and you're not getting one. there could be this is going on for years and you never documented it once. The judge is only looking at the documentation, not you coming in and explaining that's been happening for 2 years. You have no support, nothing to support what you're saying. And then now we got to the old he said, she said.
Right.
And that you're not going to get one granted. Now, in this case, what they're doing is making a report. And it is let's talk about the word stalking. Now, there is a specific criteria for stalking versus my question to you. Let's go with this video. How old was the victim in this case?
She seemed to be in like maybe her early 20s.
Okay.
So yeah, she was definitely old enough to drive. She had her own car.
Okay.
So, and I'm in the videos that I'm seeing are mostly from younger females. So probably, right, like late teens, early 20s type
Okay.
of situation. There's definitely a sense of, like I said, like when I see, especially with younger women like that being stalked in stores, there's that hint of the human trafficking element.
Right. So that would be good, like what you said earlier in the documentation, because I guarantee you that's not the first time and the first victim that's been stalked. So we
Right.
want to put that together. And there are task force specifically in each department and in the state that are like a warehouse of putting all this together, and they make the connections. So your one report matters because there's video most
That's
of the
awesome.
time. So it does matter.
Yeah.
Okay. And what I wanted to emphasize here, because it's not always, okay, we see some of it, as adults 18 and up, but let's also remember that it is a complete different scenario
Mhm.
if you have somebody under 18 that
Okay.
is we're using the word stalk, but
Mm-hmm.
it can use any type of unwanted attention or inappropriate attention.
Yeah.
Is called child annoyance.
Okay.
And that is a crime arrestable right then and there. You don't need to, quote, do anything. They will review the video and let the courts and the district attorney decide what they think the child annoyance occurred, and let them decide whether or not they want to go forward with the case. But it is the job of the police department to document that. And I personally would be sending that down, and I've sent it down for less.
Yeah.
And an example of one of those cases to just give you in this emphasis. Now, this is a little, probably not, this isn't really directly about human trafficking, but it's in that realm where you have a predator.
Yes.
And it was an adult that had approached an 11-year-old girl. She was coming into a local Walgreens, and the victim was with family members, but they just walked ahead of her. So she wasn't by herself. And this person came out, met her in the doorway, just like ran
Out of
into her
nowhere,
out of
kind of.
nowhere, just in the
Yeah.
store, just passing by, and everybody was there. It was all out in the open. And he grabbed her, like he just hugged her and then kissed her on her cheek.
Oh my
I think
gosh.
I don't know if he tried to, I think he kissed her on her cheek, and they called the police.
Yeah.
He fled. So this isn't it's not the word stalking. It is
Sure.
a child annoyance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And some people get confused saying, well, there wasn't any actual
Touching.
the touching was the kissing, but
Right.
but there's specific criterias for different types of crimes and sexual assaults against children. And so people could try to even downplay that. And he tried to, even the parents thought that she knew the person from school.
Oh.
So even to them, it wasn't
Was
even
like-
as noticeable or as a crime,
Right.
but that is a crime.
Yeah. And I think that's
That is
the
a crime,
importance
and
of
it's
this.
called child annoyance. And if there is any intent upon him, for instance, wanting to, quote, let's just make this up, date her. And he
Right.
says, oh, I wanted to date her. Let's just give that as an example. That is actually a full felony,
Right.
which it would not be if an adult male did that to you or I. It's still a problem as a stalker or something like
Right.
that, but it's not in the same definition as it is with a child under 18. And that person was arrested
Yeah.
and was interviewed carefully and
Interesting.
was prosecuted. And what was interesting in this particular case, which I want the listeners to know,
Mhm.
and this speaks to that person making the comment about, hey, why call the police? In this case, that had happened as well with this individual. This individual, when I was done doing a records check,
Mm-hmm.
had done this type of thing to not only juveniles, but to adults as
Oh,
well.
interesting.
And he did it on buses, he did it passing by wherever he was, and he did it in every Bay Area county around us here. And all
Almost
of
like a
it,
serial,
yeah, he was serial.
right?
And in this case, all of them said dismissed in the interest of justice because there was nothing exactly happening, not in a direct assault. There was some grabbing or sometimes touching of the area, which would be a sexual battery on an adult.
Yeah.
But the problem was this guy thought he was smarter than the police and
Okay.
said that, one, he did language variance, said he only spoke Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, he pretended that he was crazy by saying the devil made me do it. And in this case, this is where we need to make reports, because if every law enforcement agency checked this guy, they would have seen that this was a pattern. So even if no other cases, maybe the victim didn't want to prosecute, you have that right if you're an adult. You don't have to, go for prosecution. But if you could please let the police department know, what if there's several more and the person escalates into now more
Heinous.
crimes,
Yeah.
and now it in this case went to a child.
Yeah.
If we don't look further into that, and if we don't know, because people have failed to make the report saying, oh, this guy was a what, and he just grabbed me because he's trying to talk to me because maybe he thought you were pretty, like
Right.
this dispatcher said.
Right.
That wasn't the case here. So we have to be diligent, not only as the people that this may be occurring to, but we need to be diligent as police officers and take a look further, because I did, and he went bye-bye, and we got a prosecution,
Yeah.
and that his little ploy did not work.
Yeah.
If you take a closer look and you do your job.
Yeah.
And that's why it matters if you make reports.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and I know because there's, everybody has their story and in their interactions, whether good or bad, with law enforcement. And so, but when it is bad, it impedes your ability to want to work with them.
Right.
Because you feel like the minute I say something, if you stonewall me even just a little bit in the beginning, I'm going to immediately think, what am I doing this here? Fuck it. This is just a waste of time. Just go. You're not helping me. You're not doing anything. It's just
I would feel the same way.
And me too. And like rightfully so, right?
Right.
Because we feel like in the interest of justice in the community, you're here to protect and serve us.
Yes.
Not yourself.
Right.
And so like, just because you're not in the mood to take my report and you immediately want to brush me off and, and go about your day,
Right.
go to a bigger, somebody else who's having their, a real problem or whatever, and this is why it's just important to have this conversation, because regardless of your interactions early on, with law enforcement, it is important to, especially with the amount of crimes against women, crimes against children.
Right.
It's not getting better.
No.
It's just there's nothing about this that's getting better. If anything, we're just getting better at sweeping everything under the rug still. And I know with things that are coming to light now, especially in the entertainment industry, the human trafficking that goes on there, and the sexual assaults that go on there, with politicians, with law enforcement, we can go on and on and on. It is important that, I think as women, we are sick of trying to get justice. And I think as women, we are now wanting revenge. And what that looks like is advocating for ourselves harder than we've ever done before.
Right.
And learning how to do that, learning in a way that we can go, we know for a fact this is what we want to have happen, and we need to make this happen.
Right. So I wouldn't think of it as in terms of revenge. I would think of it in terms of seeking justice. That has not been, been a pattern
Right.
for some of these victims,
Mm-hmm.
and for women in general.
Yeah.
So this is something that, you want to make sure that you are heard, And that if you feel you're being dismissed, that you need to be contacting a supervisor. And I don't care if the supervisor sides with them because it's their friend, then you keep going. Don't forget that sergeant that comes out has a supervisor too. That's a lieutenant, which is the watch commander. And those are going to be the people that are on duty, but it doesn't end there.
Right.
You can keep going on to the chief of police. And if you say, well, they're all corrupt and they all stick together, you know how those police are. They're all together. It's the good old boys.
Right.
But you have your city councils who oversee the police department. Send an email to your city council.
So we're talking about chain of command here, right?
Yes, we are.
We got to start with, okay, I'm being dismissed at this level.
Right.
Next, I'm being dismissed at this level. Next,
Right.
like bring it up. But this is the thing that we have to start doing for ourselves, is advocating
Right.
for ourselves on a different level than has been expected from us before.
Right.
Because we are no longer have that luxury of just letting shit go anymore.
Right.
We don't have that, because we need to start creating paper trails for these predators in order for some action to be taken place. Because sometimes when these predators even appear in front of a judge, this is the very first time they've ever been in trouble, right? Or the very first time that anybody's ever really told anybody about this individual. So like there is no paper trail to go, well, this person has been on the radar for so long, like maybe we should have a bigger element to this. It's usually like, this is your first offense.
Yeah. Right. Right.
And so that's the importance, as well as, of if you are feeling like you're being constantly targeted by somebody, or even if this is just your first interaction. And I think a lot of it too is, as women, we're always like, people are always gaslighting us, and we're always gaslighting ourselves
in different areas.
And so like we're always like, oh, that was just weird, but it's not enough to, but it is. It is. If somebody's doing something to you out in public and they're just willfully doing that,
yes,
what does that say about them?
Right.
That they're just coming up to somebody, to a kid or one of these, younger females in a store and groping or following.
Right.
That's not their first rodeo.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
They've been doing this. So we need to stop it wasn't really a big deal because he really did
or an isolated incident.
Or an isolated. It's not. If he has the balls to do that right then and there to you, he's going to do that to somebody else, or he has done that to somebody else.
Right.
So let's make sure that these people start getting the attention that they truly deserve.
Yes.
And that is from law enforcement and not from us,
Right.
So, and I know that, there's one other example that, it came from a father in Ohio, and this was it was recorded from his Ring camera. He had, his daughter was on Instagram. There was an adult male who was DMing her, grooming her. And she wound up sending, I don't know if it was full nude or if it was topless or something, pictures, right? So pictures of her undressed.
And the victim was how old?
She was like 11, I believe.
Okay.
And so the dad finds this out. He calls law enforcement over. I think this happened like in the day, afternoon or something. And he called them over. I need somebody to come talk to my daughter. There's this man grooming her. Law enforcement shows up like after she had gone to bed. It was like, I don't know, it looked really late, like 9-10 o'clock at night. And he answers the door. He's like, my daughter's gone to bed. Like, I called you guys hours ago, like, how is this helpful?
Wow.
And they say to him, well, we need to get her up because we're not here to talk to her. She's the one at fault. She's creating child pornography by doing that. So we're here for her. What ultimately wound up coming to light is they actually got in trouble. Those two officers they did wind up getting in trouble. But
right.
But again, we're dealing in an age, the electronic age, traffickers,
right,
pedophiles are coming in. I don't know how many times I've been told about a 19-year-old female being groomed on a PlayStation and leaving home to meet up with that person.
Right.
And like One of the events was a mom calling from a southern state that that needed somebody to intercept her daughter at an airport in California because she was homeschooled all her life. She was playing on her PlayStation. She met up with this guy. He's not who he says he was. Right? He says he's in his early 20s, but he wound up being 30 something. You know what I mean? And so like now the parents are like, we need somebody to intercept my daughter, at the airport. That type of thing is that this is what we want to stop have happen. And it's hard if law enforcement is showing up and saying, no, we're here for your kid. Your kid's the one at fault, not this grown-ass man.
That's not how it works. And I'm glad they got disciplined, because that would be more of the exception than the rule. And I would really hoped that that would be on a really rare basis than on a regular thing. But it can happen where things are dismissed, but there's protocols for that. And they probably were disciplined on that. First of all, we don't even interview children at night. And if they're also not even qualified.
Right. I was going to say, these
them.
are uniforms.
You have to be, you don't know if there's more things going on. So I would be talking in a forensic setting, and that should be set up with a detective. But the initial report does need to be taken by a uniformed officer saying, hey, these were the allegations. This is what the circumstances was. So I would be speaking to the parents, take your information down, not even talking to the juvenile. And then they set up a time and a date where they will bring somebody that is actually trained in talking to them and doing some follow-up, and then going from there. But in order for you to get to the detective, you don't just call the detective. It does have to be an initial report, so they have something to work off of, and then they work up a case. So before they come in, they're trying to get the information from you, whatever they have, and or look at the computer. Now, what gets tricky, but there are people that specialize that within the departments too, that are into the computer, extracting that information. Sometimes those are led with crime analysts that have more training in this area, because this is always evolving. And so you have other components in the police department that they will reach out to get that type of information, so they can see where that's coming from. Checking IP addresses and what it is that the person, where it is, and what kinds of methods that they're using, if they are sophisticated or not, because there is a whole child pornography on that people specialize in that. Yeah. That is not going to be your line level officer either, but they have to take I think the emphasis on a lot of what we need to get out to the public in a podcast like this is that the most important thing that we have to remember is not who specializes in what, but the fact that we need to make that initial report. And if you are getting dismissed on getting that initial report, then you need to escalate it. And by escalating it, I mean, you're going to speak to a supervisor. And if the police department has just stonewalled you, then go to the city and the city council and go ahead of that and just say, here's a major investigation that the police department is stonewalling me on, and I'm going to need to get this investigated. It shouldn't have to go to that level, because I think a supervisor should be able to deal with that, but that's not 100% either. Nothing is. Right. And we want to make sure that we get that documented. Do not get dismissed. Do not allow them to dismiss you. Right. There are cases that, just need to be documented, and it doesn't harm them to take a police report number, case number, and document it. Right. It doesn't mean that even if it's not able to be followed up at that moment, we need to capture the fact that there was an incident that happened at the Target. Right. And the person left. But this is what they look like, and this is the victim. Once they put those together, that is how we solve crimes. But if we don't get those initial statements and reports, then that's not helpful. And even though the police come out, what people may not realize is that whenever there's a police call, they are recorded in not only the phone call taker, of the dispatcher, but also it is entered into what is a computer-aided dispatch system. And there's some of them are different. They're not all the same system, but those are, hey, there was a call. I went out on the call. Suspect was gone. I left the scene. The end. I'm just making this simple. Right. But they're going to just put, hey, there was, for instance, a trespasser. This person has repeatedly come out. and they were gone when we got there. So we typed in, it was this person in this description. The next time that the police officer comes out, they have that it's the same, looks like and sounds like the same person. From there, they can build a case, but we have a record of the fact that you called. That is not a police report. In this case, where she was being stalked, and she knows what that is, and they can verify that with looking at the video,
Right.
that should be an actual police case number versus an incident that just says there's a record of the call. 'Cause that's not a police report, but it still gives you something. The difference between
true.
the
Right.
difference between the two, though, is that we can see in-house what's going on, and other agencies can say, hey, do you have anything in-house on this? And they can look at that. However, let's go back to the guy that was, stalking people on buses and stores, and that
Right.
child, they had brought the person in, and I could see it because I'm running up for the state contact. So they were trying to investigate, but they were not successful in doing that. And I could still see we have a pattern here, but if I just relied on just the in-house, I wouldn't have even known what city he was in to even call you to ask, hey, do you have any contacts? But I run what's called a rap sheet, means that they've been arrested before and taken in, but there was insufficient evidence to prosecute. Well, that makes it go on record with the state.
Right.
Even if there's not a prosecution, and I can see that, but the in-house I cannot. So even if they go, oh, there's a record, yeah, there is in that city. But another agency would have to know.
Yeah. Right.
And so that's the difference between making a police case report with an actual case number versus the hi, there's a record of the call, because there is a record of the call.
Right.
But
And-
that's not helpful when we're putting it together.
Right. Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that, like I said, I think the idea of getting more and more people to understand that no incidents when it comes to something, if it makes you feel uncomfortable, then it was wrong.
Right.
That interaction between you and that individual
Well, and it's not
was
wrong.
not okay.
It's not wrong to make a report, and it doesn't even take that much time if it's something, simple and it's a one-page report. So what? You can insist on a report even if they're not going to send it down for prosecution.
Right.
Because a lot of times they're trying to make a report because it's going to go to the district attorney either by arrest or by possibly seeking a complaint. But there are reports that we're making that we're showing that there's a pattern of theft in this area. And even though we don't have a suspect and it's not going to the DA's office, we're still making a report because we're putting them all together. And what we do with those reports, let's say you've got, 20 of them. And then on the 21st, they catch a suspect. Guess what? They're called key cases. And in those cases, the DA in this county can go and prosecute all the other ones that we didn't have a suspect if we can make the nexus and the link between them.
Make the connection.
And if you can make the connection, then, they're always stolen the same thing, or there's a method that is the same way.
Yeah.
Something that links them, the nexus, that person can be prosecuted for all of those crimes. So that's why if you don't make one
Right.
for your car, something being stolen off of it, you don't really know that there was like 20 others in your neighborhood or another city, even say, the city next to us, because that's what they do. Everyone thinks it's an isolated incident. And why are you going to even report it? Because there's no suspect.
Right.
It's not that they're trying to call the police to say they're not taking the report. It's because they don't have, the history, so they can't be charged. So it does matter. And some of those are you can do online without even coming in contact with the police report, with the police officer. They can make a police report case number online with each agency. However, what I do caution people and what they do need to understand about those online reports in these types of cases is that, and it does have a disclosure on there saying that, hey, you're making a report, this is a case number, usually they're for insurance. However, there is no investigation because there's no suspect. So you're not supposed to be doing something online when you don't have a suspect.
Okay.
But they can pull those records out if they get a suspect, or if they go and look for that. They would need to, somebody can pull that information if they can make the connection. However, if you have a lead or if you have an ongoing problem, don't make an online report. Make an officer
Come to
you and make the report, because that's easier. There's an investigation that's easier to find.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I think this has been really wonderful. I mean, I really appreciate you coming on here and talking about these elements, because like I keep saying, it is important that we, get people to speak up and
Yes.
to advocate for themselves. One last question. What would you suggest if the female or the child might be here illegally, and so therefore they're afraid of contacting the police or making a police report because of the stigma? Like, I know we can only speak for the state of California, but are you aware of at any point where a police officer is going to show up, and even if the person doesn't speak English, that officer is going to say, well, prove to me that you're a citizen? That just doesn't happen.
It's illegal.
Okay.
And it's not just because of politics today.
Right.
That was illegal a long time ago.
Mhm.
And that's not allowed. And actually, while I was even working long before, somebody tried to mention something about that on a domestic,
Mhm.
and they were disciplined.
Okay. Good.
And
Good
they're
to
not
know.
allowed. That's no bearing at all. And even in my career,
If
it
you're
was
a
not.
victim of a crime, you
If
are
you're a victim of crime, it has
you
nothing
are
to
a
do with your
victim of
status.
crime. Right.
You're a victim of a crime regardless of where you are.
Okay.
I would make one in another country. I'm still a victim, but I'm not a citizen.
Right.
But I'm still going to make that report. They should be making a report here. They need to not fear any repercussions. That's illegal
Thank
for
you
that to occur.
Yeah.
It is completely illegal, and the officers would face discipline if they are even asking that question.
Okay.
And
good to know.
even in custody, things have changed with that. But there
Mhm.
was a reason once you're in jail, they have to disposition and be able to identify you. Here it has
No bearing on
no bearing. You are a victim and you have rights and protections as a victim and or a witness
that. Mhm.
of a crime. It is not, I can't emphasize enough, people that don't speak English or from another country do need to come forward. That is not a barrier, and it's not legal
Okay.
for them, and they shouldn't even be asking. They will ask you for your IDs
Sure.
because we have to put a name on there. Tell them if you don't, and that's it. I've
Right.
already done that myself.
Mhm.
And if they need to clearly understand that, we have advocates that are bilingual
Mhm.
in many languages, and that will be emphasized, especially in our domestic violence units.
Right.
That is emphasized and protected.
That's amazing.
And it has made an impact for people not continuing to be victimized.
Yeah.
Because they are brainwashed into thinking that
That law
they
enforcement,
have, you have no job, you don't speak English, so
Right.
you better take what I give you. And that's so long ago. It's not even today that I was dealing with that.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely women who are married and come to this country, and then
Right.
their passports being taken away by their
Right.
spouse, and you see a lot of these in arranged marriages, and just obviously regular marriages as well. But then they get here, and then their passports being taken away, and then they're told exactly what you said. You don't speak the language. You don't have papers. Nobody's going to believe you.
Can't
No,
get a job.
You can't get a job. What are you going to do without me? You just have to stand here and take it. And they should know that there are avenues for you.
Absolute
to-
avenues and protections
Avenues and protections.
and support.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's not new.
Right.
That's not new. That has been happening for many, many years.
Yeah.
And we have been able to make impact, thank goodness, to, language not being a barrier.
Yeah. Yeah.
To really emphasize.
Yeah, I agree.
And we are bilingual
definitely-
now, even
Yeah.
if someone does not speak it, you have a lot more officers that are bilingual, but you also have so much more services available, and your advocates in human trafficking and in domestic violence
Right.
are bilingual in many languages, and we are way more multicultural than we ever were.
Thankfully. Yeah.
So this is a time that we are here to support.
Yeah.
And way more than we ever could, 30 years ago.
Yeah. When this was
Right.
right, when women didn't speak up on this. So it's
Until a
incredible.
bilingual officer got out there.
Yeah, yeah, that's incredible. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking on this topic with me today. I think this has been incredible to have you on, and I
Thank
look
you.
forward to many more podcasts with you.
I do too. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Medusa's Awakening podcast. Stay up to date on new episodes by following, liking, and subscribing to our pages. We are on Instagram at Medusas_Awakening, on YouTube at Medusas Awakening, and on TikTok at Awakening_Medusa_podcast.